So I got the latest issue of JustinCristelli's, aka TheRealManos' RedKnight, and this is the third issue of the Knight Without a Sword story arc. And much as I expected, I found the third issue relatively enjoyable as the first two, and by that I mean a lot. Justin has crafted a world with not just RedKnight and a few bystanders, but a world that is populated with heroes and villains. And what you might consider secondary characters that have a primary purpose. Now, to get into the art, J.C. Grande is not someone who he's not someone whose art that I usually gravitate toward, but I will say with each progressive issue, he's gotten progressively better. With each subsequent issue, I should say, he's gotten progressively better. The only caveats that I have with this third issue, which I think artistically is his strongest, is I think a little bit of the overuse of the zippertone technique. For those of you not familiar, it was something that was most popular, as far as I can remember, in the 70s, which you had these bunch of already pre-made dots that were supposed to, in a black and white comic anyway, take the place of grays. So if you're not doing a lot of cross-hatching, or if you're not using a lot of ink wash, zippertone is what you would go for. Now I think that JC uses it to kind of polish things over in a nice way, but there are times where I think that his use of zippertone is a little bit excessive. And by that, I'm talking about when you're using it to describe an outdoor scene as being either dusk time or nighttime, and you're doing so in lieu of having to draw backgrounds. That's when I believe a tool that you're using can end up becoming a tool used by you, or you're being used by a tool, I should say. And the only other thing artistically that I have an issue with, and this is like the second or maybe third time in this series I've noticed this, is that J.C. Grande will use either a straight up photograph or some sort of stock image where you can clearly see that it's not something drawn freehand, and that it is something very much from a camera. And I believe this image is on page 4, panel 4. And it's a little bit disconcerting, but as long as it's something as it relates to trying to get the comic book out on time, well, I'm not crazy about it, but I get it. But if it's something that in the future that he incorporates into being what he considers to be a legitimate artistic technique, then I don't know what to say about that other than that would be a decision that I think would eventually work against him. Now, as far as Justin goes and his writing of the book goes, the one comparison that I will make in terms of TV is if anyone has seen 8 Simple Rules for Dating Your Teenage Daughter, starring John Ritter and Katie Sagal. The thing that I thought that was strongest about that show from the first episode was that it felt like it was lived in. It felt like a show that wasn't new. It felt like a show that had already been seasoned, even from the first episode forward. And much like that, the RedKnight comic book also feels like it's something that's lived in, and it's not something that's that you got to get that new car smell out of. It feels like that car that you've been driving around for a while and that you've gotten comfortable in. And what Justin has these characters communicate just feels very natural and not very, for want of a better term, not very comic booky. The only potential issue I can see Justin eventually having is that since he's made such a lush world, such a rich world with not just RedKnight, but with a nice group of supporting characters and other heroes, not to mention the villains, is that possibly in the future he could run across something that I believe Robert Kirkman has run across during his second to third year of Invincible. You will have made up a lot of characters that potentially have interesting backstories themselves, in which case, if you flesh those characters out, the character of RedKnight could potentially be almost in a way forced in the background. Whereas if he sticks strictly with the focusing of the RedKnight character, then other characters that he's made up that could have significant points of interest toward them could end up being lost in the mix. Again, I believe that's something that a lot of comic book creators wish that would be a problem that they would have. But in Justin's case, he's shown himself to be up for the challenge, up for the task, and if nothing else, if I were a reviewer, I would say definitely pick this comic up, and if money's an issue for you and you're a comic book buyer, just consider perhaps putting down that one issue of Marvel Comics that ties into like 10 other titles, or a DC 52 book that really isn't worth the paper that it's printed on, and support someone like Justin, whose independent work is coming straight from the heart, and that nothing is being done to cheapen it or to lower the standard of what Justin has set up as being a very strong book quality-wise. The next book that I like to talk about is Rainbow in the Dark. This is by the husband and wife team of Comfort Love and Adam Weathers. And the best way that I can describe it is if you take the movie Pleasantville, for those of you who are familiar with it. Pleasantville was a movie, Pleasantville was a movie that was set up in black and white, and then something happened to introduce color in their world, and if you multiply that tenfold, then that's sort of how Rainbow in the Dark is. It's basically with issue 1 anyway, a black and white comic that color is introduced to it, and when the color is introduced to it, it's kind of like you've gone from this place, kind of like dark shadows minus the horror element, and then when you put in the color, it's kind of like some of the creatures you see there are as if they just stepped out of Mike Mignola's Hellboy. And I really think that this independent comic will be something that we'll be seeing at the very least as a cult classic, because these characters, the primary characters in the color world, are basically what I would consider to be a cross between Jack Kirby's Forever People and the TV show and TV's Happy Days gang, and it's definitely a mind trip. So that's pretty much all I got to say about these two books. I would hope that the recognition that both of these comics are getting would get wider recognition, because they're both deserving. And until next time, that's my 2 cents. Night out.